versus Wade. A world in which daughters have fewer rights than their mothers and their grandmothers did at their age. In the 2 years since the Supreme Court overturned Roe, nearly half the states in our country have banned or effectively banned access to abortion. Women in those states have extremely limited options for accessing essential health care. For many of these women, their only option for getting the reproductive care they need is going to another state. Last year alone, 171,000 Americans traveled across state lines to access an abortion. Pro-choice states like Nevada are welcoming these women with open arms and providing them with the essential health care their own states have outlawed. In the last 2 years, the number of women coming to Southern Nevada from out of state to get abortion care has doubled. But even though Nevada is a safe place for women who need health care, anti-choice politicians living outside my state are telling women, no, sorry, if you try to travel outside this state, we're going to prosecute anyone who helps you. Elected officials in states like Tennessee and Texas and Alabama are trying to punish women for leaving their state for reproductive care, as well as anyone who helps them, including their doctors or even their employers. Why? Because for these anti-choice politicians, this is about controlling women. That is why today I am calling for passage of my Freedom to Travel for Health Care Act. Our legislation reaffirms that women have fundamental right to interstate travel and makes it crystal clear states cannot prosecute women or anyone who helps them from going to another state to get the critical reproductive care that they need. The Freedom to Travel for Health Care Act would also empower the Attorney General and anyone impacted to sue the anti-choice politicians who have violated their rights and put these barbaric restrictions in place. And it would protect healthcare providers in pro-choice states like mine, in Nevada, who help these women traveling from out of state. Now, I wrote this bill 2 years ago after the fall of Roe v. Wade because, like many women across the country, I could see that the anti-choice movement would never stop trying to dismantle women's rights. And we're seeing that played out before our very eyes. We're hearing it today on the floor. We see it in our states. Last month, Lauren Miller came here to Washington to testify in a Senate subcommittee hearing and tell her story. Lauren was a mother of one and was thrilled to find out that she was pregnant once again, this time with twins. She and her husband couldn't wait to grow their family. But at her 12-week ultrasound, Lauren learned the most devastating news. Half of one of her twins' brains was filled with fluid, and it was not going to survive. Lauren needed to abort this fetus to save the other viable twin and to protect her own life. The problem was, Lauren lived in Texas, where abortions are almost entirely banned. Lauren's doctors wouldn't even talk to her about having a life-saving abortion because they were so afraid of Texas' intentionally confusing laws, and they did not want to be prosecuted for practicing medicine to help her. In her testimony, Lauren said, and I quote, "My pregnancy was not my own. It belonged to the state." Even after she ended up in the hospital at risk of organ damage to her kidneys and her brain, she still could not get the care that she needed. Lauren was forced to set aside several days and thousands of dollars while she was terribly ill so that she could fly to Colorado just to access reproductive health care, just to access 21st century medicine. And if that wasn't enough of a burden, Lauren and her husband were terrified to travel out of state because of Texas's bounty laws. In Texas, private citizens can be paid by their government if they catch anyone who has helped someone access abortion care. Oklahoma has adopted a similar law. This is what happens when we give it to the states. This is what happened with the overturn of Roe versus. And this is what when we're talking about states' rights, this is it. These laws mean people seeking abortions have to plan for their out-of-state travel as if they're doing something illegal. Lauren and her husband had conversations about whether they should leave their cell phones at home and only use cash so they couldn't be tracked in this day and age, like they were criminals of some sort. All because Lauren was dying from an entirely preventable health issue that she couldn't get care for in her own state. When my colleagues and I first introduced the Freedom to Travel for Healthcare Act, anti-choice Republicans told us we were getting worked up over nothing. When we introduced and reintroduced it last year, anti-choice Republicans still told us we were overreaching. Anti-choice Republicans' main argument continues to be that it's just not necessary, that we're being hysterical, that we need to calm down. Lauren Miller and her husband weren't being hysterical. She and her healthy son are living proof that we need to protect a woman's right to travel across state lines for abortion care. My anti-choice colleagues can pretend this isn't happening right under their noses, but women across this country know the truth. Anti-choice politicians want to control women. They don't want women leaving the confines of their states with abortion bans, and they don't want us to have bodily autonomy. Well, I stand with the vast majority of Americans who believe that politicians have no say in a woman's health care decisions. Women like Lauren Miller deserve access to life-saving care, regardless of the state they live in. That's why we must pass the Freedom to Travel for Health Care Act now. This is common sense legislation to uphold a woman's constitutional right and freedom to interstate travel for health care. So, Mr. President, as if in legislative session and notwithstanding Rule 22, I ask unanimous consent that the Judiciary Committee be discharged from further consideration of S. 2053, the Freedom to Travel for Health Care Act of 2023, and the Senate proceed to its immediate consideration. Further, the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Is there objection?
Mr. President,
Senator from Mississippi.
reserving the right to object. Mr. President, my pro-life colleagues and I most certainly do not oppose any individual's freedom to travel across this great country, but we do take issue with this effort to give bad actors cover from prosecution. While this bill poses as protecting pregnant women from prosecution, it would actually put vulnerable women and girls in harm's way if it became law. This would allow traffickers and abusive partners, parents, or relatives to take vulnerable women and girls across state lines to obtain abortions in an attempt to cover up their abuse. These same abusers would also be given the freedom to travel across state lines to stockpile dangerous chemical abortion drugs to bring back to a life-affirming state. The chemical abortion regimen can pose traumatic complications that a woman or girl should never have to deal with, especially without medical care at her home. According to the FDA's own label, these abortion drugs send roughly 1 in 25 women to the emergency room. With this legislation effort before us, we see pro-abortion advocates promoting the scariest possible scenario by allowing a teenage girl to start the chemical abortion process across state lines with mifepristone, only to be sent back to her home state to deal with the physically and emotionally painful process alone. We can and must do far better to protect women and girls from this heartbreaking and dangerous situation, and we certainly should not be shielding bad actors from prosecution. It is for these reasons that I must object.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President.
Senator from Nevada.
So one, let's just be very clear. This legislation has nothing to do with shielding bad actors. And number two, mifepristone is a safe and effective drug and has been for over 50 years. So for my colleagues who have been on this path to limit access to health care for women for the reproductive freedom right, to claim and make this misinformation and these scare tactics when they are not true does not do right by women. Let me just say this. A majority of this country, including men, including Democrats, Republicans, nonpartisans, support the right of a woman to choose. That's what this is about, continuing to fight for those rights. A woman should have the freedom to access 21st century health care. Giving it to the states to make this decision is still giving it to elected officials to be in the room with women when they're making this decision. That is not the answer. But until we can overturn Roe versus Wade, we need legislation that's going to protect women so they can access this 21st medicine medication when they need it and come to states like mine without being the fear of being prosecuted, and the doctors need to be protected. That's what this is about, and it will always be about giving the freedom to women for their access to health care in this country. And I will tell you this, my colleagues and I will never stop fighting for this. It is too important for our children, our young girls, and their future. I yield the floor.
From Washington.
Mr. President, so to recap, we just tried to pass some very straightforward legislation. A bill to protect a woman's right to travel across state lines to get the health care she needs. A bill to protect a doctor's right to provide legal abortion care to their patients without being threatened by an out-of-state extremist. And a bill to ensure more health professionals can receive critical training in comprehensive reproductive health care to help meet the dire need for providers. Not a single one of these bills should be controversial. To oppose these bills, as Republicans have just done, is truly extreme. Are we going to let politicians hold women who want an abortion captive in their states? Seriously. If a woman wants to travel somewhere so she can make her own personal decision about her health care, are Republicans going to tie her hands? And if a doctor in a state like mine, where abortion is fully legal and even protected by our state constitution, if our doctors treat a patient from somewhere like Idaho, something that happens every day, by the way, do we want to let out-of-state extremist politicians threaten and try to punish them? Again, we are talking about healthcare providers performing an abortion in a state where abortion is legal and protected. Republicans are all for states' rights until it comes to letting a woman make their own healthcare decisions. And when it comes to training, let's be clear, abortion is healthcare. And in some cases, a patient's life may depend on whether they can get that care or not. That is why we need to make sure every provider can get the comprehensive reproductive health training that they need by supporting medical training programs that are doing this important work. It is incredibly frustrating to me that so far, Republicans have blocked these proposals from moving forward. Seems when it comes to an abortion, there is no bill too simple for Republicans to oppose. There's no right to too basic for Republicans to attack, and no problem too important for Republicans to ignore. Republicans haven't just voted down our efforts to restore abortion rights in every state, they have voted against the right to birth control, they have voted against the right to IVF, and now they have opposed letting patients leave their state for care, letting doctors provide legal care to anyone who comes to them, and helping healthcare providers get the training they need to save a life. But let's be clear, no matter this outcome, no matter how far Republicans follow the most extreme anti-abortion voices in their party, Democrats are going to keep standing against them, pushing for reproductive rights, and fighting for patients. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor, and I suggest the absence of a quorum.